Hi.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming today. And
Yes.
super happy to be celebrating with everyone virtually, of course, considering safety and everything. So I guess we'll start off with some introductions. My name is Amélie Wen Zhao, and I am the author of the Blood Heir trilogy, the last book of which came out today, Crimson Reign. So the Blood Heir trilogy is about an exiled heir with the power to control blood, who partners with a crime lord to unravel a great corruption that's gripping her empire. So throughout the series, it's a bunch of adventures in ice cold, I don't want, yeah, Russian inspired empire. And yeah, very excited to be celebrating with you guys.
Yes. I'm so excited to be here with the release of your final book of your trilogy,
Thank
Amélie.
you.
For those who don't know, I'm Francesca Flores, and I'm the author of Diamond City and Shadow City, the sequel. And it's a duology about an assassin who, when she gets sent on a job, she messes up and the guy gets away. And so she has to go after him again. But while she's doing that, she uncovers a conspiracy in her city. And so then she starts trying to work against the people who are trying to destroy her home. And yeah, it's lots of fun.
Love it.
So I'm so happy to be here for your trilogy. And you've been working on this series for 8 years now. How does it feel to finally have it all published?
Oh my gosh. It feels like in the blink of an eye it happened, and it feels like I was actually talking to my fiance about this, and it feels so weird because when we're publishing books, it takes years to write them, like 1 or 2 years to write them, and then it takes like a year to promote and for it to be published. And it just feels like you're kind of looking back in retrospect all the time, like, oh, that was like me last year, or that was me 2 years ago. So I kind of like I'm in the midst of like my next project right now, and today, this afternoon, after finishing at my job, I had to sit down for a moment and really like take my copy of my book and then be like, wow, like I made this.
Ah.
And I started like reading it, and there's like a certain distance where you feel like your own words are new, kind of,
For
and
sure.
you're like, okay, wow, like I did this, like this is awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, this little book series started 8 years ago in 2014. And it took me 3 years to write the first one, and then a few months to write the second and third.
That's how it goes.
It's busy schedules. So yeah, it is finally here.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Like you look back while you're preparing for your debut year, you feel like so nervous and your book is still like a part of you. But as you
Hmm.
start working on your second book, it starts to feel more and more distant. And then, like you said, when you open it later on, you're like, whoa, who wrote that?
I
Oh,
know,
yeah, I did.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like when especially since we have to read these books like so many times throughout the
Mhm.
revisions and publication process, it just feels like you're in a haze of your own
Yeah.
words, and you just kind of you're like, okay, I need to take a step back and not read it for like months at least, and then you come back and you're like, wow, like I made this, and I actually
Yeah.
really, really love it, and it feels like a trip home, to a place you haven't visited in a couple months, but it feels like coming home.
Exactly. And since we're on the topic of like how, how it's been 8 years, like how do you think the series has changed from when you started it? Because I imagine in 2014 when you started writing it, maybe you had dreams of having it turn into a series one day. So like how far do you think it came since then? Like tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because this book it's called an Anastasia Retelling, but it is very I feel like it's gone very far from that. In 2014, I had just visited Russia after graduating college, and I was really taken with the history of their revolutionary spirit. And how the legend of how the monarchy, not the legend, the history of how the monarchy fell, and then also the legend of Anastasia, which was made into a grander myth with all the movies and musicals, etc., that have spawned from it. And I really took all these elements and started thinking of my own story.
Yeah.
And at first it was an Anastasia Retelling, but then I was like, you know what? Like, I've been reading about princesses my whole life. What if I made one that was also a monster? And so I gave this princess the power to control blood. And then I added themes from the real world that were very relevant in the part of the world where I come from. And I also added characters that were from exactly where I come from. Like there's a um, East Asian-esque assassin in here that shows up, and that
Love
became
her.
actually one of the point of view characters.
Yeah.
So I think like as always, with writing stories, we're always examining parts of history or parts of our culture or themes relevant to the real world. And it kind of becomes your own thing when you take in the perspective of your own background and how you interrogate the world as it is. So I think the Blood Heir trilogy bloomed from all that and became what it is today.
Yeah, exactly what you said. Like you're taking a story that has been retold lots of times, but nobody's going to retell it the same way as you. And so you ended up making it your own.
Yeah,
I
it's like
loved,
with
yeah.
Aina in the themes of like, poverty and
Mhm.
class that you explore in Diamond City. It's your own it's
Yeah.
like it's your own product, and you kind of digest it and make it your own and tell a story to the world.
Yeah, and that's why there can be so many stories about princesses or assassins, but they're all going to be, different.
Exactly.
And speaking of Anna's bloodbending powers that you mentioned, I know in Crimson Reign she loses access to these powers, and it's something that these powers were really difficult for her to come to grasps with in the first book, and sort of seeing herself as this like kind of monster who can hurt people, and she's had a long journey of like reconciling these powers within herself and realizing how much of a part of her they are. And so I'm curious about your choice to take them away from her, and why do you think it was important to show a character who lost something that was so important to her, and it was important but it was also something that was hard for her to deal with, but she lost this.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. So, in the first Blood Heir book, we are introduced to Anna, and from the very first scene, she is grappling with her power, which society has taught her that being an Affinite and having, these kinds of powers is something to be reviled, and you can only do monstrous and terrible things from these. And so it's really ingrained in her mind early on that, okay, I can't use this power, like I'm disgusting, I shouldn't be here. And she's really grappling with that. But it is such a like being able to manipulate blood. It's very powerful, right? So you can do that. Like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And she is
Yeah.
the exiled heir of a fallen kingdom or falling empire. So she really grapples with that responsibility and how you how you how you trade off, your horrible actions to achieve a good cause, I guess. So there's that quote that's like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Which way is she going to go? And
Yeah.
how much bloodshed, for example, is okay to achieve a greater good? And that's really what she's grappling with, her identity in the first book. In the second book, she kind of accepts that and she's like, okay, my powers can be used for good. I can go towards a good cause and I can use it responsibly. And she starts to embrace that. She really starts to learn more about herself and really develop her powers. And then in the third book, I wanted her to come to that acceptance of herself and then have it taken away. Because character development, I
Yeah.
feel like with our characters, there's always got to be something that, they're afraid to lose. And I thought it was kind of poetic in that at first she hated her power. She didn't want it at all. And then it became something that was, that really defined her. And then she learns what she is without this power. So in this book, she's really interrogating who she is without her blood affinity, what kind of a ruler, if a ruler at all, she wants to be with just as a regular person. And so she makes choices that are without her blood affinity, that are from a regular person, and she really interrogates the meaning of running an empire and being able to rule or not rule, and what is in the end good for her people. So I really wanted to focus on that. And yeah.
I love that answer. And I love how much you thought about how her relationship with her blood affinity is kind of running parallel to how she views her empire and her place in it and whether it should exist at all. And that being said, when she comes back from Bregon in the third book, so she comes back to Cyrilia and she has these new ideas, partially because of the journey she's been on and now because of losing her powers and seeing herself as like a regular person. And she starts seeing so many of the flaws in her homeland and wanting to change them and questioning whether her empire should exist at all. And I guess I'm curious, like, why you felt it was important to write a character who comes home after a long time and starts questioning everything about the place that she loves so much. Like, she has to answer these very hard questions and realize that it's not perfect, even though she loves it.
Yeah, I think that really has to do with my personal journey, and I think it's kind of relevant to, what's happening in the world today. So when we are born into a certain place, a certain culture, certain political norms, etc., we are, I guess, in a way, indoctrinated with certain values and beliefs, and if that is our only worldview, then how are we going to see the world for what it is, and how are we going to be able to think critically? So in the first book, her journey is to really be discovering her empire for what it is. It's not like all glittering marble and gold and gilded like she knew in the palace. It's a cold, dark, and brutal place where Affinites are oppressed and foreign immigrants are also oppressed. And there are these peoples who fall in the cracks of the law that she was never aware of. And there are certain practices in her empire too that she was never aware of, and that, as a ruling family, that's not acceptable. And so the first book was her discovering about all these and thinking, okay, my empire is not perfect, and what am I going to do about it? The second book, she journeys to Bregon, and she discovers there's a whole other way of ruling with checks and balances. There's a king, but it's basically the British system, and the people vote them up. And she realizes, this is a really great model, and it's not perfect, but it's something that we can work towards, and people are heard. And in the third book, she takes what she's learned, all that knowledge, and she comes back to her empire, and she really interrogates. Okay, for the first two books, I've been fighting with the goal of coming back for the throne and taking it from the current evil villain who's ruling it. But should that be my goal? I need to depose the villain, but should my end game be the throne? And should there even be a throne at all? And so in the third book, and I love it so much because she starts to realize that being a good leader means considering the good of her people, not her throne. So I think that it's in this book that Anna realizes why the current villain who's sitting on the throne, who's basically like a dictator, authoritarian, etc., why it's so brutal, and why she needs to transition this system. Because I think with monarchies and dictatorships, it's only good if you assume a benevolent ruler, but take away that benevolent ruler and put someone, with horrible intentions or to serve himself on it, and it's just a horrible system with no checks and balances. So Anna really has to interrogate what is the best system for governance, and what do I do with the legacy of the monarchy that's been broken that my family has given me.
I love how in-depth you thought about this answer. And I like that you started with this in the first book, and it's really Anna's whole journey, which can be hard as an author to plot out from the very beginning of a series and then go all the way to the end. But I think you kept it really consistent. And speaking of that journey, there's someone on the journey with Anna, a special boy named Ramsin, who we all know and love. And they have a really angsty, slow burn romance that is really addicting to read. And I'm wondering how you decided to write their relationship in that way and sort of what you think it adds to the story.
Yeah, I loved writing that, and I'm like an angsty romance kind of girl. So more to come in the future in different angsty ways. But I think that I love these characters so much because at the start, they're both coming to each other really broken. Anna is grappling with the whole blood affinity and being afraid that to be herself essentially. And Ramson is a criminal who through various circumstances, was forced into the underground society when he was young. And he's also coming to realize, like Anna, that it's not the best path for him and it's deeply flawed. So they're coming to each other with so much baggage. And in the first book, we see their like jagged, thorny edges start to like really clink against each other and they fight and they banter and they come to real disagreements. And then they start to kind of fall for each other. And and I think that a lot of people who read the first book were like, "Why didn't you give us a kiss?" And
I was one of them. I was like, they're on a boat. They're on a boat for weeks, Amélie. It takes 2 seconds to kiss.
I know, yeah. But yeah, I was just like, I don't know if they're ready. Like, I want them to. I'm a person who's, slow at falling in love, and everyone is different. There are people who like fall in love quickly, and I love those books and those stories as well. But for this story, I really wanted there to be a real connection first, and for them to be able to get on each other's side, and still disagree with each other, but be able to contribute positively to the relationship. So I think the two of them really had to get over their baggage first before being able to come together. So in Red Tigress, we see that progression, and yes, there is like a very passionate in the rain kiss in Red Tigress. Um, and then I separated them at the end because what else are you gonna do? You can't have them together for the third book,
Character development.
Exactly. So
I'm so excited to see how it turns
yeah.
out.
Thank you. I mean, you yourself are like queen at angsty romances, and I don't know if it's a romance, but a relationship between Ina and
Yeah,
Cole.
yeah. in in Diamond City, Ina is in a sort of pseudo relationship with her boss. It's not like an official, they're not a thing, but she's really dedicated to him and cares about him a lot. But she ends up having to be very careful with her heart in the second book because Cole betrays her a lot and ends up being very manipulative. And so she kind of has to figure out like what is love and how do I fit into it? And so she sort of stumbles around a lot with it, and she makes a decision in the end with a special someone in the book that I was very happy for her to end up with. But it was a very long journey for her to get sort of, I don't want to say get over, because she's going to be healing from the things Cole did to her and how he manipulated her in the first book for the rest of her life, pretty much. But she grew a lot in the second book, and that ran tandem with how her relationships with other people progressed. So I really loved writing that. But I think my favorite trope to write is probably enemies to lovers. I just love the
Me
angst
too.
there. It's so fun to write. And Ramson and Anna kind of have that a little bit in the first book. I mean, they're kind of like bickerers to lovers. They definitely have different perspectives on things, but they challenge each other a lot, and it's really fun to read.
Yeah, I love reading it too. And I think like in general, like romance, there's a lot of, certain perceptions about it. Especially more in if you get to like the adult fantasy world and more like a male readership. There are certain perceptions about, why fantasy romance, but I just think that's so unfair because I love reading about love. I think it's one of the greatest things in life. It's also how you find yourself, like through love. Like you said with Ina and Cole, she really had to decide who she is, and she found out a lot about herself through seeing who Cole is and seeing how he impacted her as a person. And same with Anna and Ramson. Like they really found each other through they found themselves through each other through fighting and everything, and they came to. It's something that you have to earn. I feel. It's
Yeah.
something that completes your character arc, for me at least.
Yeah, and I think like we were talking about, like the perception of YA books and like the romance in them, even with books that have like insta love or they fall together really fast, there's always still like challenges that come up with that, and they still have to learn who they are, because insta love, it's not like happily ever after from the first page, even if it's instant attraction. And so I really love how different YA books can be, like across the entire age category, whether they have romance at all. But with the ones that do, they treat it very differently. And I love that. I love that about YA.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, since we're on to like sort of the more like fun tropey topics, I wanted to ask like a fun question for you. So what's another YA book that you think Anna would do really well in as a character if she were just dropped in? Like, would like where she could function in the world and like, help the protagonist win the plot or whatever.
Oh
And
my
a
god.
follow-up question, who is a character from another YA book that you think could do well in Anna's world? Do well as in survive.
I've seen those memes where it's like, oh, fandoms are saying like, oh, like what would you want to be in your fandom? And some people are like, I don't want to be in my fandom. It's just a
Yeah.
rough world. I think Anna would do really well in the Hunger Games. I mean,
Mm,
she's so like OP, like overpowered. It's really unfair. I feel she could just use her powers like that. But also, I don't know if she'd fit well in certain societies because she's a little emotionally damaged at the start and probably throughout.
good struggle.
Yeah, I think she
Yeah.
would. I think she would win the Hunger Games,
You know, I
and I
usually
think
think of
she would.
like newer books when I think of this question, but now that you bring up Hunger Games, I'm like, yeah, my characters would probably do well there too. They're just,
Yeah, they
yeah,
would.
we have very
Cole,
bloody
especially.
books.
Oh yeah, we do. The bloody
Yeah.
truth. And then the book where they would do well in, I was thinking Diamond City actually, or the
Mm,
person who would do well in Anna's world. I was thinking Aina. Like I know
yeah.
we joke about this so much where there's like a parallel
We've
AU,
discussed
but
this, yeah.
I know, yeah, like Aina would do totally well. She'd be friends with Lin, my East Asian
Mm,
assassin.
yeah,
Um,
she would. And
yeah,
Anna would probably be friends with Teo because they're kind of like the softies of the group. They would get along well.
and that
Yeah.
leaves Cole and Ramson.
The softy deadly people. Yeah.
The softy deadly people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had another fun question. So if you could send your characters on a vacation anywhere in your world, and for this I'm really thinking of Avatar: The Last Airbender and thinking of how even though the characters had really tough journeys all the way through it, there were always like these little fluff episodes that they could go on and like have fun, and they were like literal children. So they needed those times to like go have fun and just be themselves. And so if you could send your characters anywhere in your world to have a vacation, where would they go? And what would they
Oh
do?
my gosh. They need to go on like a beach.
Yeah.
To be honest, they need to go like lie down, I don't know, in Cancun or something, or like SoCal and just really have a chill day.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, not do anything. I think Lynn would have fun in somewhere across East Asia, hopping over some temple roofs and everything, which she
Hopping.
actually does in Crimson Rain. Um, but yeah, Anna needs to just sit on a beach by herself, maybe with Ramson, so she can have a punching bag. And yeah. What about you?
I know would struggle on a beach. I don't think she would do well on a beach. She'd be like, "This is too open. What do I do? I need to like look for people hiding and trying to kill me." Like, she would struggle. So I think maybe like a mountain vacation. Preparing for the Hunger Games. I think she would do well like in a forest. There are a couple scenes though where she's walking through the forest and she struggles a bit because she's a city girl. I'm a city girl. I don't fare well in forests.
I
And
know,
so
we
she trips
really
over
didn't.
like, yeah. I don't. I like the idea of them, and that's what I think Ina would do. She'd be like, "Yeah, I'll do a nice camping trip," and then she'll get there and she'll be like,
It's time to go kill someone.
so maybe her ideal vacation would actually be just like visiting another city, because that's where she thrives. And
Diamond
yeah,
City, Shadow
yeah,
City. There's no
mhm.
forest and no mountains in those
None.
titles.
There's a river. It's kind of polluted. You probably shouldn't swim in it, but it's there. Inspired by me growing up in Pittsburgh,
Oh.
surrounded by ugly rivers.
Was Diamond City inspired by Pittsburgh in any way?
I mean, I didn't think about that like while I was writing it, but looking back, I see like, it has this like long industrial past, and Pittsburgh
Mm-hmm.
is known as like the steel city, and it's also surrounded by rivers, which Pittsburgh's downtown area also is. So it definitely worked its way in there, and I didn't like plan that at all. So I think that's pretty cool.
Love that.
Yeah. And so my next question for you is, what is coming up next for you? You have a couple of books on the way for us.
I have a new series on the way, which I am super, super excited about. It is called Song of Silver, Flame Like Night, and it is a Chinese xianxia inspired fantasy. It is about a girl without parents again. There seems to be a common theme. Um, it is about a girl who works at a indentured at a tea house in a pseudo colonized China. So the historical background, it's not real world history, but the historical background that was inspired off of was China's century of humiliation, during which all the Western forces essentially came in and colonized certain parts of it and carved it up like a pie. And then there were, parks saying like no Chinese people allowed on Chinese soil. And it's about this girl who has a strange symbol on her arm that nobody else can see until one day she meets a boy who who is actually a practitioner of an ancient Chinese inspired magic. And I am in love with that series. The magic system is different from Blood Heirs in that Blood Heirs is more elemental, but that magic system is more like it's based off of Chinese Taoism and Buddhist mythology, with types of spells. And yeah, so I'm super excited for that.
I love
Yeah.
it. I mean, I've read like a few chapters, but I think it's
Mm-hmm.
changed a lot since I last read it. But I really loved
Understatement.
what I I really loved what I did read. And just talking about the magic system, like I was reading it and it felt so like intricate and in depth. And I guess that shows like the depth of the culture and history that you're drawing it from. So I'm
Thank you.
excited
What
to
about
read it
you?
again. Yeah. So my third book will come out next year. I don't have a specific release date yet, but it's a Rapunzel retelling with vampires and witches. And so it's about a witch and a vampire.
I think we are losing Francesca. Francesca, are you still there? One second, guys. Let me just message her. Facing technical difficulties. Okay, while we wait for her to come back, I am going to answer some audience questions. Um, okay, so the first one I have is from Katie. And it said, do you know how the trilogy would end when you were first writing Blood Heir? Um, Probably not. I don't know if anybody who debuts with a trilogy knew how it was going to end. We were kind of just like, okay, I'm going to write the first book and see where it goes from there. I just knew that there was an open ending and that there was more to be built upon. And I just left a lot of open threads that I could connect into a second and potentially third book. So definitely a lot of new inspiration came as I was planning it and plotting it. And it went a wildly different way from any outline that I submitted to my editor. So, yeah, Crimson Rain was not planned when I first started writing it at all. So, yeah. And then from Serena, what tips would you give to writers when writing a synopsis or outline? Oh my gosh. I literally recently just wrote both a synopsis and an outline because I didn't know the difference and I had to redo it. For a synopsis, it's different from an outline because an outline, as I recently learned, it includes all the plot beats. So it's typically for my agent, it's typically 8 to 12 pages. I gave him like a 17-page one because I like to be an overachiever. But usually it is all the plot beats, every single subplot is listed out, and it's almost like chapter by chapter, but not really. Synopsis, I would say, is more of a pared down version. It's probably the main plot with mention of a few little subplots, but definitely no details like, oh, who betrayed who, etc., etc. So I hate writing both because I'm a very like have a general thought first and then outline it in details and then go into drafting it. But unfortunately, it is part of the publication process, alas. So yeah, I see. Francesca, are you back? Let me just message her. Okay. All right. Keep going with the audience questions while she's coming back. Grace, what can you tell us about your future projects? I have already told you, and I have sent it as well. But I can tell you there's more angsty romance. I think it has changed since the last time you read it, Grace. And I'm just super, super excited to start talking more about it. I have seen a cover sketch that I'm in love with. And I'm about to start writing the second book, which I'm very excited for, and it's a little bit daunting, but I'm actually excited that this one is going to be a duology because a trilogy was really, really hard to write while I was at a full-time job. So yeah, I think that a lot of people, hopefully a lot of people will love it. It is an interrogation of my heritage and the history of the part of the world I come from. And there are so many little Easter eggs that I think if you understand the culture and the history and parts of the language, you might be able to find. But I hope it's an immersive read for everybody. Hi, Francesca.
Hello. I'm back again.
Lost you for a
I keep getting
second.
halfway through an answer and then getting cut off.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
So see, we answered the synopsis one, and you answered about like writing a dual. You answered more about your future project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I wanted to hear you finish pitching your beautiful The Witch and the Vampire. Or am I allowed to say it?
Okay. I'm gonna go fast because it seems like Crowdcast is testing me. So it's about a witch and a vampire who used to be best friends, but one day the vampire escapes imprisonment in her town, and then the witch is sent after her to hunt her down and annihilate her because vampires are bad. And so they go into this creepy forest that has a lot of curses and stuff, and the witch pretends to be the vampire's friend to help guide her through it safely. But then they sort of end up falling in love, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to write. Oh, I did it. I didn't get cut off. But yeah, gay vampires, Rapunzel retelling, really excited.
I'm so excited. And the cover is gorgeous. Well,
It's not
whichever version.
But yeah, I'm excited to share when I can.
I am so ready, even though I've read it. Like, I read it like a year ago, right?
Yeah. think you've read it like
Yeah, well,
twice.
we were talking about publication, how it's always
Yes.
like you're looking back at yourself, and like we're our own worst critics. So looking back, you're
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like, yo, that book is coming out or something.
I will say that because I know we have some authors in the chat, and I just want them to know that my third book was a million times easier than my second book. So if you're struggling with your second book or afraid of it coming up, it gets better. I promise.
Yes, the second book was literally the worst book for
Torture.
me. I think it's because the first book you've taken like years and years to write. At least for me, it took years of like writing and rewriting, polishing. And the second book, you're suddenly on deadline. You're revising the first book, and you have to churn out this new project in what, 4 or 5 months, which was my timeline. And it's your first time doing it, so you have no idea how to tackle it. And then the third book was much better. It was a ton easier because I was kind of like in the flow and I kind of knew what to do already. Feeling like getting towards like a more veteran author. And then my fourth
Yeah.
book was it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was easy, but I had like my process. I would wake up at like 6 a.m., work until 8:30 a.m., go to my day job, and then eat dinner, and then work until like 11 p.m. And those were like good blocks of time. And like I had a good process as well to dive into it as well. So
yeah,
so it does
that's what I
get
feel like. Your
easier,
process changes so much. Like I was a little bit the opposite because I used to write so much faster, and like I wrote the original draft of Diamond City in like a month and a half. But then what changed
God.
about being on, but like the book two was still so much harder, and I took longer to write it. And it's just like that of being like on a specific, it's partially the deadline, that's like a huge part of it, but also like you have higher standards of writing the more and more you learn, and the more that you learn about revising and like the publishing industry, you just like get a lot more critical about everything as you go along. And so it becomes even harder to like churn out something that you're happy with, but you also have to churn it out in a specific amount of time. So it's just like, book two is hard, but yeah, you'll all be fine. I promise. We did it, and we're here to tell the tale. So
Sort of alive.
yeah.
Yeah. And then let me see one more. Becca, what's the most satisfying thing for you to write? I want to say like bloody scenes, but it's actually, so action scenes are actually like the worst for me to write. And I've heard people and readers say like, wow, like yours are so visceral and so vivid, like they must be so easy for you. I'm like, no, I really hate writing them. And I remember like I was writing Song of Silver Flame like Night, and I was just literally for a couple hours I sat there. I was like, I have to write the final battle. I don't want to start. It's gonna be so annoying. So action scenes are the hardest for me to write, and the most satisfying is an angsty romance scene. Yeah, which I think there are plenty of in Blood Heir and more of in Song. There's just something about that, like being so bittersweet and then like having like them almost together and then tearing them apart, which is like so much fun to write.
Your favorite hobby.
My favorite hobby. Yeah. What about you?
Okay, well, since we're talking about hardest and most favorite, so we were talking about like, or you were talking about the action scenes. And with Diamond City, I wrote an assassin book, you know, there's a lot of action scenes. And so I think it's always hard for me to write them, but I love revising them. And some like advice that I saw, I think I don't remember the exact author, so I don't want to guess and get it wrong, but I saw this advice on Twitter by like a more established author saying to treat action scenes as like their own mini story. Like they have an arc, and it's a story between these two characters, even if it's just like some like faceless minion that your character has to fight off, that's still a part of their story. And so like making it this little story. And so I really like going back to my messy first draft action scenes, which are just like, she stabbed him and then she pivoted away. That's the first
my
draft
gosh.
status, but I love going back and like fixing it and like making it really flow in the story and be really like fast paced and hard. So yeah, but you were also talking about like the final battle. And I think climaxes are the hardest part for me to write because they're just like so overwhelming and there are so many like moving pieces and you have to make sure like everything comes together and you need like so much energy to write them. You need to like go into their like action time.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, my favorite parts, I love writing the beginning of books because I love like setting the scene and start this world that the reader is this really like vibrant image of what it's like to live in their life. And I feel like the beginning is the part that flows the easiest for me and it feels really natural to write it because I'll just write it all and I'm like, oh wow, I have this world now and this character, and it's like really satisfying to see that come together. But also like you, I love writing the romance and the angst, and my vampire witch Rapunzel retelling has so much, and these two girls used to be best friends when they were growing up, and then there's sort of a betrayal, there's confusion, it's messy. And so then they become enemies, but one of them doesn't really know that the other one hates her so much until they start talking again. And there's like there's a lot of like bickering, but then there's also a lot of angst because they're remembering their past memories, both of them being friends, but also remembering how they started to have crushes on, and remembering the little moments where they would be hanging out together and then they would just like start staring at each other and be like, so that's really fun to write because it's
you're bringing up old wounds, Francesca.
Yeah, like the past memories and like how they didn't get to explore that romance before they were like torn apart, mixed with their current angst of like not really being able to trust each other. It's just so much fun to write.
Yep. And I saw Katie wrote, I like to do insert action and make my life miserable. Oh my God, Katie. So I did this once but instead of insert action, I just wrote like some random crap into it. And I was like, I'll come back and fix this and make it pretty. And then I was doing line edits when I saw this line that said, Lynn whirled her dagger, slice, slice, slice. She jabbed it at the attackers, stab, stab, stab. And it was literally like verbatim like that. I was like, and then Krista was like, more descriptive. And I was like, oh my God, this is so bad.
Change it before sending it.
I did. I forgot to change it before I sent it to my editor.
That's so funny. Oh my God. I'm always scared that I'll do that.
Yeah.
I'm always scared that I'll leave like some silly comment to myself in there. Like I'll usually leave things like, and I have a Scrivener. I can use the comment function so that it won't actually appear on the manuscript. But for some reason, I just like to write in parentheses. Like, just like really vague comments to myself.
I think I've seen some of those. Yeah. It's okay. People identify with us.
Oh, sorry, what? Yeah, for sure. That reminds me of writing NaNoWriMo novels, which for people who don't know, it's when you try to write 50,000 words of a novel in a month. And I think I was like 16 when I wrote this one book for it, where I couldn't figure out what the action scene, but I needed to hit my word count for the day. And so I had these like, what was it? Ninja rubber ducks? I don't know what it was. There were ducks. Okay. The character wasn't fighting the ducks. I was just like, I need words. There are ducks and they're fighting and there's danger and there's like 50 people fighting her. And yeah, I hit my word count goal that day. So I still don't remember what the ducks were doing, but they were there.
Oh my gosh. Things we do for the word count.
Yeah.
And then Katie is asking, would you consider writing or publishing a contemporary fiction novel? And then I think I want to also just add or conclude by seeing like what other genres we would like to, write or explore in the future. So,
yeah, I think we've talked about this a couple of times, like contemporary, and we'll like we always think about it, but then magic ends up finding its way in there somehow. Like I've definitely had ideas for it, and I have ideas of like sort of very subtle magic elements. Like I have some historical fiction ideas that have like very, very, very subtle like magic in it. I don't think I have an idea for an actual contemporary, no magic whatsoever story. Do you?
One of my dreams for like older, like 40-something-year-old Amélie is to write like a contemporary historical, I don't know if that conflicts, like some postmodern Chinese historical book about, the Cultural Revolution and a lot of, because I think the times during which my parents grew up in China in the 70s, 60s to 80s were some of the most interesting times, and I would love to chronicle that one day. So for like 40-something-year-old Amélie, who is a bit more like life experience and historical knowledge about it, I would love to do that. But contemporary is hard because it's there's something so fine about being able to do like plot beats and emotions without all the blood and all the action and magic for real.
Right?
Like I really
How
am
am I
dying
supposed to have an
to do
inciting
that.
incident without an explosion?
Yeah, so I would love to one day. And yeah, but what about other genres
Yeah.
that you would like to explore, Francesca?
So I always loved reading historical fiction. I think I mostly read it like in high school. I would just like go to Barnes and Noble or Borders or whatever, and I would always like pick up new historical fiction books. But I would be a little terrified to write them. And like you mentioned about like the maturity thing, I think when I was 18, I tried to write a historical fiction time travel book, but the characters were like 30. And I and I remember like realizing at the time, I was like, I should come back to this later. So yeah, I have a lot of ideas like in historical fiction. But yeah, I would need to do like a lot of research. The research part intimidates me. And yeah. But
Yeah.
contemporary, I don't think I have any ideas. I do have some ideas that start in our world and then magic gets involved somehow, or the characters go through like other world, just
Portal
contemporary.
fantasy.
I love reading those books though. Yeah.
Love
Like I
that.
love reading contemporary. I read it a lot, but it's hard to write.
Yeah, I was trying to write like an idea of like a Chinese historical novel, and I kind of gave up because I was like, okay, if I have to describe like a freaking vase, I have to know what materials were available during the Tang
Yeah.
Dynasty in China and how it got here.
Mm.
I give up. I'm just gonna make things up and vaguely put them in a historical context.
Exactly. Like, oh my God. One of my historical ideas is set in like 4 different time periods in San Francisco. 2 of them are in the past, and then one is like contemporary, which I would be able, that's my experience. I can write that. And then the other one is like sort of futuristic. So I'm just like, history research. But I want to do it. So one day.
One day. Love it. Yeah. Okay, I think that about covers it. Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you, Francesca, for chatting and goofing
It
off
was
with
so
me
nice to talk
for
to you
about
again.
an hour.
I love that the
Yeah,
comment section
so
right now is stab, 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 slice, slice, slice.
characteristic for a launch with Francesca Flores and Amélie Wen Zhao.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a good night, and
Thank
I will see you guys soon.